Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. Today we're going to introduce Argus Intelligence. Many of you might know us from some of the offers we've had out here for quite some time. Those offers have typically revolved around software. So many people know us for our Argus Enterprise tools. We do have data and analytics tools that many of you have used in the past, and very big offerings around our advisory service as well. So our valuation business and our tax business and whatnot. So all of these things have kind of evolved over time and kind of worked piecemeal together, and there hasn't really been true integration between them. Right now, we're in the process of changing that, and we're introducing what we're calling the ARGUS Intelligence Platform. The ARGUS Intelligence Platform is intended to bring our capabilities together into a comprehensive, unified platform to allow our users to go in and start accessing all of the tools they use here at ARGUS through a central login and a central connectivity of all of their data. Over the past few months, we've been working with our counterparts in the market, trying to find out some of the challenges that they typically face as they look at commercial real estate. The top things that we found is, the first and foremost, the data that people need is not really readily accessible. There are a lot of people that work in Argus Enterprise, and within Argus Enterprise, there's a plethora of data, but that data is not really easy to get to or use outside of AE. There's limited access and visibility on the models. So within AE, there are various ways people use Argus Enterprise. You can see people use it with budgeting, valuations, they use it in the transactional world. And anybody can kind of do whatever they want there, and things can kind of get lost in a void within the portfolio and scenario aspect of Argus Enterprise. It's difficult to consistently measure performance. If you think about Argus Enterprise, it's very good at what it does for a point in time. It allows you to go in and kind of build out a cash flow, come up with a valuation. But if I want to look and see how that has changed next quarter, last quarter, or over some sense of time, that's not something that's very easy to do. And then lastly, nobody really provides the intelligence that many people need to kind of do their job a little bit better. We're looking to change all that in the form of Argus Intelligence. So Argus Intelligence really breaks down into three key components. We have an asset level tool that you're going to see in a moment called Asset Manager. It really starts giving you insights into the asset and doing scenario analysis, whether that's period over period, acquisition to current, etc. There's Portfolio Manager, which is going to allow us to roll those assets into portfolios and do some analysis at that level and drill down into different aspects of that portfolio potentially. And we're not going to look at this today, but there will be kind of a future webinar around this where we start talking about benchmarking. And benchmarking allows us to get in and start doing analysis of our portfolio against another known data set, against indexes out there, to see how you've performed versus that index. So in that sense, you can look at your portfolio performance, how your portfolio has changed, and compare to how it's changed to the market. All of that comes together in what we're calling Argus Intelligence. So Argus Intelligence that we're going to talk about today really starts bringing your data together into a single platform, and it allows you to monitor, utilize, and compare that data across assets, portfolios, and eventually benchmarking against your peer sets. So what does that mean for you? Well, right now I'm sharing the Argus Intelligence landing page, and in here you can see the different aspects of what you can access based on what you've been given permission to. So Argus Intelligence at its core is Argus Enterprise that you guys are all familiar with, as well as the Asset Manager tool. We're going to dive a little bit more into Asset Manager in a moment, but functionally it really is extending the capabilities of AE outside of just the core Argus Enterprise user group. We also have Portfolio Manager, so this is where we'll be able to take those assets, roll them up into portfolios, and do kind of higher level analysis. And then, as I mentioned, we do have Benchmark Manager. So we're not going to cover Benchmark Manager in today's webinar, but I did want to kind of allude to the fact that this is where we'll start seeing how we compare against the index. So within Argus Enterprise, you guys are familiar with the portfolio and scenario constructs typically, and how data sits in there and kind of becomes a point-in-time version of an Argus model or of a property. Asset Manager starts to take that and kind of pull those models together into a view that's much easier to see what you've got, when you've got it, and how it's being used. So it all starts with the concept of an asset. In this asset screen, this is a listing of all of the assets that I'm utilizing from Argus Enterprise. And for purposes of today's conversation, we're going to talk about an asset being a specific address, and more importantly, your ownership in that address. So in this example, 141 Demo Street is property 0. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's the acquisition model for 141 Demo Street. It doesn't matter if it's the valuation model, this year's budget, last year's budget. Those all still are property 0. So how are we doing this? Well, behind all of this does sit some technology that was on one of those first slides I showed in the form of our Altus ID. So we have entity resolution that is taking the address within your ARGUS models, looking through our platform, and kind of assigning a unique ID to it. And that unique ID is going to become important, not just in what we're doing today, but in future capabilities you'll see on the Altus platform as well. So in the context of 141 Demo Street, I might have multiple versions. Now those versions can be seen within the asset model screen. So again, if we think about the asset being the address and a piece that you have an ownership in, the way you're using ARGUS for that asset can vary. So in this example, I do have valuation models. I've got a budget model this year, but you can also go back in time to any other version that you might want to use or see within your history of this asset. Now, this screen is very helpful not only to the person that's using AE on the regular, but also to people that may not be an everyday ARGUS Enterprise user. Those people now can come in here and start getting some of that same information without having to go back through the AE user themselves. So this history of what's going on is really important, and really it's extending kind of what you're doing in AE today into the platform itself. And it's doing that by telling us how you're using a model. In this screen, we can see, for example, I do have valuation models and budget models. This is being pulled in by tagging these models as such inside ARGUS Enterprise. So we are using what's called a model type and model subtype, as well as a period, to kind of show whatever might be loaded at any given point in time. So for example, we have a valuation model for June of 2024, so my Q2 valuation model. And in this case, it's tagged as an external model. Now, the nice thing about this is this subtag here, or the subtype, can be anything you want it to be. So we have clients that might want to see for evaluation their draft, their revised, and their final models, all that reside in a single period. And that's going to become important when we get into the overview section in a moment, because you'll see there are some comparative features where we can look and see some of the key differences between those models. So again, the asset leads into the model screen. The models are all the different ways we're using that specific asset. And then from here, we can actually click on one of these and start getting into the asset level detail for that specific version. In this example, I'm looking at the Q2 2024 valuation for property 0. And we can see very quickly, I start getting an asset snapshot. At the top, we have some key performance indicators. So some of the high level things we're calling out. And then down below, we get into some more of the cash flow and valuation driven items. And we see things like the total value derived, what kind of cap rates are being used, what key assumptions do we have for growth, and more importantly, what's the cash flow that's driving that. So we can kind of see all those pieces in one spot. We can also drill a little bit further into this and start getting into some of the key metrics, especially around kind of your top line rent, since in most cases, rent is the key driver of revenue in your buildings. We call out certain things like our contract rent versus market rent. Are we over or under market rent in this case? And the ability to now drill into the leasing tab and look at any one of your contract tenants and see, hey, is there a specific tenant that might be driving that difference, or is it across the board? All of my tenants are under rented. So like very quickly on this screen, I can call out tenant 3 here. We can see they're currently at $785 a square foot, and market for their suite is $1,380. So they're well under market. And in fact, it tells us how far under market they are. And it also tells us how much longer they have left on this lease. So unless I can do any kind of negotiating to get that tenant to sign early or change their lease terms, we can see that we're kind of stuck at that contract rent for quite some time still. Versus right below it, tenant 5 is already under a year. We're probably already in the negotiation process, and we might get this $1,285 per square foot closer to that $15 square foot metric. So the asset manager component starts off as just that, the ability to drill into an asset, and specifically a version of an asset. So in this case, that 2022 Q2 valuation model. Now we can take it a little bit beyond this as well. And this is where you start getting into some of the new things that people can't do very easily inside ARGUS Enterprise. And I alluded to this from that model screen, the ability to go in and compare what might be happening one version to the next. So in this example, because I'm looking at the Q2 value, maybe I want to see how this compared versus the Q1 value from the same year. So now I have the ability to click add a comparison, and I can choose any other version of this asset that might exist. Today, I'm going to talk about valuation period 2 to valuation period 1 this year. But it could be showing me, hey, show me what I underwrote this at and where do we sit today? So you've got the ability to pull from any of those models that you've loaded. So in this example, I will use my external valuation from Q1 of this year. And as soon as I put the system into that mode, we do start seeing everything shows in a comparative mode now. So all those key performance indicators at the top now show trend arrows. We can see whether things have gone up or down, period over period. And then down below on the key metrics we see around cap rates, discount rates, valuations, et cetera, we can see how those have changed as well. So in this case, we can see cap rates did drop between the two periods. We can also see, if we look on the right-hand side, cash flow went up between the two periods. So this increase in valuation is kind of driven by pricing as well as cash flow. We can also look down below and see did any of the key assumptions on growth change, or did vacancy and credit loss change as well. So it is going to call those differences out to you. If we think about the leasing side, we can also drill into the leasing and see have things changed on that side as well. So if we kind of pop into the leasing tab, we can see everything does go into a comparative mode here. So in this sense, now we can see any new tenants that might have come on. So for example, this contract renewal 2 has executed since the previous quarter. So it did not exist in Q1, but in Q2, they have actually executed that lease. We can also see if there were any changes in leases that existed. So in this example, we can see the remaining term has changed, and that makes sense typically. I mean, you expect the later model to have a shorter lease time left, but it'll also call out things like change in contract rent or market rent. So in this example, we can see 2 tenants did have a contract rent change, which leads me to believe that there was probably a rent bump in their lease that happened over the change from period 1 to period 2 of this year. So from an asset perspective, we started opening up a lot of the pertinent information that people are typically extracting out of Argus Enterprise and doing analysis on in Excel, and putting it into dashboards that are easy to use, not only for that AE user, but also potential other recipients of this data that might not have access to AE on a daily basis. So what we've talked about here is what we call Argus Intelligence, which again is the combination of Argus Enterprise and Asset Manager. Now from this, we can take this a step further and we can start analyzing data at the portfolio level. So in this example, a portfolio is going to be a collection of assets. And those assets can be of varying types and still sit inside the same portfolio. So if you think about the concept I showed earlier with budget models, valuation models, and acquisition models, inside this global portfolio or this industrial portfolio, based on the property type selection we choose, that portfolio can change based on a specific period in time. Now, portfolios here are distinctly different from portfolios in AE. In AE, any portfolio and then scenario within that portfolio carries a specific version of an asset. Because this is tied to an asset inside AE, that same version of an asset may sit across all 3 of these portfolios. So how do portfolios here work? It's as simple as saying you want to add a portfolio, and when you do, you end up in a screen that looks like this. Now, there are 2 types of portfolios users might create. We have what is called a static portfolio. So in this example, a static portfolio, I am telling the system exactly which assets I would like to include in this portfolio, and it will only ever include these assets unless I come back in and change or add or remove assets at some point in time. That does not mean that when I add, for example, my Q3 valuation model in here, that it's going to be excluded, because it's still asset 1 in this case, or property 1 at the top here. It's still going to be included based on the new time frame that I might have tagged that asset from. We also have the ability outside of a static portfolio to create what are called dynamic portfolios. And as you might guess, a dynamic portfolio is just that. It's something that is using criteria to tell it what kind of assets to put into the portfolio. So this industrial portfolio is an example of that. And instead of using the asset list here that we see, I'm actually applying filter criteria down below. And in this case, I've kept it very simple. I've said, show me all property types that are industrial. But functionally, you can go in and add multiple criteria if you want, and you can save these filter sets for future use or for other users as well. So you can choose as many criteria you want, and then it gives you parameters around what you can select, any of, none of, etc. So the nice thing about the portfolios that are created that are dynamic in nature is if you have a portfolio of assets right now that are industrial, but next quarter you acquire 10 more assets that are industrial, as long as they're tagged as industrial properties, they will automatically show up in that industrial portfolio without the need for users to go do any kind of manipulation of that data or kind of movement of that data. So with that in mind, we can actually jump into a portfolio, and I'll focus on a couple different ones today. This one called the Connect portfolio here, we'll see in a moment. Again, gives me access to all the different ways that this portfolio might exist. So in this case, it's valuations. And within this valuation portfolio for Q2 of 2026, I have 106 of those 110 assets. They are across multiple property types. So in this case, I do have 5 property types. And then we start getting into some of the key elements of kind of what's going on in the asset. So for this part, in the portfolio. So in this example, my portfolio has a total value of $8.2 billion. Right down below, we do see kind of the distribution, in this case of NOI by property type. Now, things like this we can change. If you want to see things like how much area measure do I have for each of those, or what rent am I looking at for those different property types, we can do that as well. It's going to show the current year and the next 3 years based on the valuation date inside those assets. And at the very bottom of the screen, we get an asset list of everything that's included in this portfolio. So down here, we'll see all the different properties and some of the key metrics that might be driving that $8.2 billion value we see at the top. So what cap rates were used, what cash flow was included in that. So we can start kind of slicing and dicing or putting together subsets of our portfolio depending on what we need to see. So this Connect portfolio has kind of the breadth of the entire global set of assets I have here, versus I can go and look at that industrial portfolio, and it's going to look a little bit different. My industrial portfolio, notice I do have other cases. So I have an acquisition example here, but I also have budgets and valuations. So if I wanted to say, show me just the budget models for my industrial properties for that same period we were just looking at, we can see this where it's dynamically narrowing it down. So it's looking at those 110 assets we had earlier. Of those, 49 are industrial. And now all of my metrics will update based on that selection. So this industrial portfolio only has the industrial assets, and of that 8.2 billion, we can see 3.4 billion dollars of that is this industrial portfolio. And then everything else is going to update accordingly. So again, it's going to very quickly start showing us the key elements that we might want to see from a value perspective out of this grouping of assets. Now, users can be provisioned to create as many portfolios and scenarios they want. So it's really up to you guys to decide as an organization who can see what and how can they see it, and how many can they see. So with that in mind, that is kind of the concept of a portfolio. Now, the other thing we can do here, and this is very much like what we saw at the asset level a moment ago, is really kind of drill in and say, hey, how is this portfolio comparing to the last time we looked at this portfolio? So again, just like we could previously, I can choose the different type that I want to look at, as well as the period, and I can choose to do a comparison. So just like at the asset level, we'll see the KPIs at the top in a moment are going to become comparative in nature. So we'll see how they compared, in this case, Q1 of 2024 versus Q2 of 2024. As you can see, we start seeing the trend arrows. So in this example, my portfolio value did drop from Q1 to Q2, so it dropped by about 3%. We can see rent did go up. We can also see there was a number of asset change. So in this case, there was probably one less asset than what there was in the previous quarter, or in this quarter, there's one less asset than there was in the previous quarter. And then down below, everything becomes comparative as well. So we can see, okay, well, did cash flow change? And if cash flow changed, was there a specific asset class where cash flow was changing more drastically than others? And if we come to the very bottom, if you think about that 3%, are there certain assets that might be driving that drop in value? So we can see, for example, property 10 has a substantial drop in cash flow period over period. So it was 110 million and it dropped to 84 million. Did I lose a major tenant? What happened to that building? So it starts calling things out. So it kind of starts giving you a lens on this screen of what might be driving those changes period over period. So was it driven because cap rates changed? Was it driven because cash flow changed? Or was it some combination of both? Now, if there is a change in asset count, where we can see we did drop by one asset, it looks like up there, anywhere you have an asset difference between the two, it will call it out with one column being NA. So you can also kind of look and see, did the value change because I sold an asset or because I acquired more assets potentially as well? So you can kind of look at three different pieces of the puzzle here and start kind of making assumptions on what might be changing. Now, the other nice thing about this is, as we're looking at the assets down here, if you want to go in and start doing some analysis, like we can see very quickly, property 10 appears to be a problem asset. And we can see there was a substantial drop in cash flow, for example. If I click on property 10, this kind of takes me full circle back into that asset view, but it's taking me in the comparison that I'm currently looking at. So now I can drill into this asset and see, are there key things that did change period over period? So again, we should see the $20 million drop in cash flow up here. And actually we see the cash flow drop down to negative 20 million. So if we kind of scroll down a little bit and look further down below, what might be driving that? So in this case, we can see in this Q2 version of the model, there's this extremely high leasing and capital costs. So now it's a way to go back and look and say, hey, maybe somebody put an extra zero in there. They didn't mean to have that 4 at the end. This is supposed to be, I don't know, 3 million, not 33 million. So again, it starts giving us different ways that we can run analysis on not just the assets themselves, but on the portfolio that might be calling out problem assets within your owned asset set. So Portfolio Manager is just that. It's taking the assets to the portfolio level. Now, I did mention benchmark, and we're not going to talk about benchmark today, but benchmark is an extension of the portfolio side. So in essence, all of the portfolios that we're creating within the portfolio view can now be benchmarked against a known data set to see how you're performing against the market. So we are going to have a webinar specifically around benchmark in November. Anybody that is on this webinar today will receive an invite to that. And please feel free to share that with any other members of your organization that you may feel could benefit from seeing not only the benchmark manager, but a recap on asset manager and portfolio manager as well. As I mentioned, please feel free to reach out to your account managers or your customer success representatives here at Altus Group, and we will be happy to kind of continue this conversation. So with that in mind, I would like to say thank you for attending the webinar today, and I look forward to hearing from you guys in the future.